Welcome to the Political Trenches, local government at work. Now, we are back in the trenches looking at the stories and issues that are shaping municipalities from coast to coast to coast. Now, we are continuing our dive into the role of the CAO this week, and we are honored to be joined by Pat The Legend Vincent, a former CAO who has, after 52 years in public administration, has decided to call it a career, but it's one part of his career we'll be diving into today. But to kick us off, our rundown today includes New Brunswick MLAs are backing the New Brunswick Local Governance Commission call for mandatory training for municipal councillors and officials. Then we head to Vancouver Island, where Nanaimo Council has chosen not to provide a letter of support for a proposed community healthcare centre. And finally, we head to the land of the living skies, where last week the town of Esterhazy decided not to absorb the Village of Yarbo. Ian, how has your last 2 weeks been?
It's been good. I think last time we talked, I was on the East Coast. Now I'm back home in Alberta. We're preparing for the municipal elections that are happening in a week and a half or so in Alberta. So there's a lot of ramping up. It's kind of the quiet before the storm right now.
It certainly is, and we will be talking about the elections in our recap, but let's head to our first stories because we have a very packed episode today. Our first story comes from CBC News in New Brunswick. A legislative committee in New Brunswick has reviewed a new report from the province's Local Governance Commission that calls for mandatory training for all municipal councillors and senior staff. Now, the report argues that many governance issues in local government stem from a lack of understanding about roles, legal duties, financial management, and ethical standards. Now, it recommends that elected and appointed officials complete training within 6 months of taking office, covering topics such as conflict of interest, codes of conduct, harassment prevention, and information privacy laws. Now, the Commission also suggests that sanctions be applied to those who fail to complete the required training. Now, the report comes amid ongoing efforts to strengthen municipal governance following the province's 2023 local government reform, which restructured municipalities and regional service commissions. MLAs from multiple parties expressed support for the recommendations, saying they could help improve professionalism and accountability in local council. Now, the Union of Municipalities of New Brunswick welcomed the proposal, noting it aligns with existing initiatives to support good governance. The Local Governance Commission also asked for expanded powers, including the ability to order training as a corrective measure in misconduct cases and to protect individuals who file complaints from retaliation. Now, Ian, what specific topics or skills should be prioritized in a quote unquote mandatory training to make it effective for both elected officials and appointed officials?
The biggest one, and you'll see there's a thread I think running throughout today's episode, is around role clarity. And I'm frequently telling a council, if because we do a lot of these types of training across the country, I'm frequently telling councils and administrators that the three things they need is they need to have the rules, they need to know the rules, and they need to follow the rules. So the rules are in place in many cases, and they don't really exist if people don't know about them and choose not to follow them. So in those cases, I think probably that's the most important aspect of training, whether it's mandatory or not. The other pieces that you mentioned are also important. Things like how do we deal with confidential information? Some very practical things about how does a governance board operate versus perhaps the board that these elected officials had served on in the past, which may have been pure working boards. So it all kind of comes back to accepting the role as it is intended to be a good part of a governance organization. And I will say this Atlantic Canadian effort has kind of led the country in some of the changes that are intended to strengthen decorum in local government councils. We saw that last fall when Nova Scotia brought in mandatory codes of conduct that had to be adopted. So they've had a look at it too. Now New Brunswick, of course, is looking at mandatory training. I think it's a great idea. And it helps to address a lot of the problems that we have seen over the years right across the country in terms of some of the dysfunction, either a lot of that dysfunction is in like it's informal dysfunction or based in ignorance. So I think we're starting to address some of those things, and I think it's a really good idea.
I'm going to play devil's advocate with you for a second because that's what we do on this show, and we seem to bounce off of each other quite well after it.
Sure.
I'm going to disagree with you. I think
All
mandatory
right.
training is putting up barriers to people who just are potentially swamped already. Now, we're talking about a few bad actors when we talk about the need for mandatory training. And I don't want to paint the entire elected officials from coast to coast to coast as saying, because of few bad actors, everyone has to do it. How do we ensure that while we are training, because everyone's gone through training, and I've been through parts of trainings where people just coast through the entire training. Training is
Mhm.
not the only issue that we have here, and it's not the only thing that we can do to stop this type of behavior. Mandatory training just tells me that I just have to sit in a classroom for 6 months or 3 months or a weekend every month and just sit there and listen to somebody and play on my phone. How do we ensure what actually happens in the training is actually implemented? And we can talk about the penalties, the disclosures of people not doing it, but I'll sit in a room for a weekend to get paid for it and say that I've done my training and still do what I want to do. How do we ensure the bad actors don't just go through the motions?
I suspect a lot of that has to do with peer pressure. That Let's go back a little while. Using the province of Alberta as an example, in or in older legislation over the last few years, the province of Alberta required municipalities to put on orientations or onboarding or training for new municipal officials. It never required them to actually attend. In a recent update to the Municipal Government Act, that has switched, so now it is a requirement for municipal officials to attend. And part of that, I think, is because of the complexity of the job and a requirement to fulfill the role of a governance person versus an operations person. There has to be that sort of training provided. I do agree with you that training ought not to be punitive, which is why when I see it as a recommendation that is coming out of this commission, that professional development can be part of a sanction of some sort, I don't really like that. But the complexity of the job, I think, is just necessitating that we generate some expertise amongst the people who are elected, who, for the most part, have to have no training in the job before they put their names on a ballot. With BC's, New Nova Scotia, I'm going to try this whole thing again, New Brunswick. And of course, New Brunswick has gone through a significant regionalization in recent years, and that has highlighted some of the problems with how governance boards operate. And it's shone a light on an issue, but I think that problem existed before. We've worked with a lot of these new regional municipalities in New Brunswick, and we've seen that the success of a council is heavily dependent on knowing the clarity of role, understanding that clarity of role, and carrying out those roles pretty well. Now, it's much like everywhere else. What's different about New Brunswick, however, maybe than we see here in the West, is that there are people in New Brunswick who have been appointed or have been elected to municipal councils who have never been part of a municipality before. So they don't have an understanding of how a municipality operates, what it does, service levels, the accountability provisions, engagement and communication, all of those sorts of things. So you were taking the devil's advocate position, and I counter that by saying if you want to get into a role where you're serving your community or any other role, there should come some inherent onboarding and training with that role. Sometimes, of course, you need a professional designation. Other times, you just need a little bit of schooling, and sometimes you learn on the job. But so much is happening so quickly in local government that learning on the job, waiting a one full cycle or two full cycles through a year or two, is not going to serve the communities very well. Ultimately, it's not going to serve the individual municipal councillors very well. And it's going to build up frustration and discord and incivility that we're seeing rise as well.
Now we're going to head to our second story, which comes from CBC again, but this time on a different coast, British Columbia. The Nanaimo City Council declined to issue a letter of support for a proposed community health center, a move that surprised some local stakeholders. The proposal, advanced by AVI Health and Community Services, had asked for municipal backing as part of its application to expand services, including adding family physicians and nursing staff. Now, both supporters and critics of the project voiced opinions at the council meeting, touching on concerns around site suitability, funding, and municipal obligations. Council members expressed that while they support improved health care access, they were not convinced that providing a formal letter of support was appropriate at this stage. Some councillors noted that more clarity was needed on operational details, financial models, and long-term sustainability before the city should formally endorse the project. Now, Ian, what factors should city councils consider before offering letters of support for any proposed project or community group?
You mentioned having information, and I often hear municipal councillors saying they don't have enough information. And to me, on a complex issue like this, where there's a yay and a nay and some pretty gray area in the middle, there will never be all the information to be provided. So councils have to go out on a limb a little bit sometimes and say they will make a decision based on the most information, the best information that they have at the time. And most likely, that's not the what information that arises after that is not going to turn a no vote to a yes or a yes vote to a no. So having enough information, I think, is one of the difficult decisions that local councillors have to have. So in order for something like this to come forward, however, this project, now it just happens to be a health center, but it could be anything else, has to fit within the community small c and big C. So communities have growing pains. Nanaimo is growing very quickly. We see topics like infill or sprawl or safety and disorder, access to necessary services, health, of course, being one of those. Where do we put those in our community? We set those things up with things like official community plans or municipal development plans, whatever they're called in your province. And zoning ought to help with this as well. We counter that with NIMBY. And this is a particular location, perhaps, where people who live nearby don't really want this to be in their neighborhood for whatever reason. But those who live just a little bit further away do want to have a close proximity to this. Nanaimo is an interesting city because it's quite long and narrow, just because it's butted up between the Island Highway and the Pacific Ocean. So the city can only go north-south. It can't really go east or west. So there are going to be facilities which are easier to access in the north, facilities that are easier to access in the south. And so zoning matters to this. City Council's long-term vision for community expansion matters as well.
And our final story comes from SaskToday.ca. The town of Esterhazy in Saskatchewan has decided not to absorb the nearby village of Yarbo. After deliberations by Municipal Council, the provincial government had set a deadline of September 30th for restructuring decisions. The move means that Yarbo will not be merged into Esterhazy and will retain its status as a separate organization, corporation, municipality. Earlier, the restructuring plan had been presented during a public hearing, and residents on both communities had been given opportunity to provide input. Some of the concerns raised involved financial implications, infrastructure demands, and the long-term viability of such a merger, particularly for a smaller village like Yarbo. Ian, should the provincial government play a stronger role in encouraging or even facilitating municipal restructuring?
Yes, in Saskatchewan in particular. Now, Saskatchewan, looking east to west again.
We have just lost every single one of our Saskatchewan listeners in this episode, Ian. Thanks.
Well, just let me get to the nuance of this. So Nova Scotia has about the same population as Saskatchewan does, just over 1 million people. But Nova Scotia literally has less than 1/10 of the number of municipalities. And that makes each municipality bigger and more viable and more sustainable. So there are 700 and something municipalities in Saskatchewan and 49 in Nova Scotia. Nobody has torn down the signs that lead to the smaller former individual municipalities in Nova Scotia or New Brunswick or anywhere else. So the sense of community really hasn't changed. What has changed is the census area or the council that presides over those particular places. And if there's any province that has too many municipalities, I think it's Saskatchewan. Manitoba's dealt with this. New Brunswick has dealt with this. Nova Scotia has dealt with this. They've taken the bull by the horns. And because the Constitution dictates that municipal organizations are under the authority of the province kind of has to do this. They need to get ahead of the lack of viability of small communities, and Saskatchewan's provincial government hasn't done that. So even if we've lost all our listeners by now, Chris, I actually think the province does need to get involved with this. They're just pushing the can down the road, and somebody else has to deal with it.
You were this close to saying creatures of the province, weren't you?
I was, but I didn't.
Good, because then we would have lost every single one of our listeners. But I want to talk about the flip side of this because
Sure.
understandable, the town of Esterhazy said, no, we're not going to absorb Yarbo, which every time I read, I want to say Hank Yarbo from Corner Gas because
I
that
want to
is
say
where.
the same thing.
So glad that we both know Corner Gas references here.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll win back some Saskatchewan listeners here.
Don't talk about Woolerton and we're good.
There we go. But I want to talk about while they've not moved forward, one area that I've heard over and over again from mayors from smaller communities across Saskatchewan is while we may not want to merge, we may want to start sharing services. May want to start sharing administration. We may want to start sharing the bylaw officer for the town to come into the village and maybe look at it that way. Can there be viable alternatives to that full amalgamation?
Yeah, absolutely there can. If they want to do that, and they are doing that, then yes, some municipalities share a grader. The problem is that when it snows and we need to clean the streets, who gets the grader first? So some of those sorts of things happen. Garbage, I think we can manage solid waste, all of those sorts of things. But and when we look at the cost of the administration of a municipality, it's not that significant for most places in terms of the frontline services versus administration. The frontline service people probably aren't going to change very much, even in an amalgamated municipality. What is going to change is the political entity and some of the management too. And I think a lot of times it's that political piece that really is the impediment to some of this change. And we saw it in this particular case, and I don't want to imply that it was necessarily the case here, but the quirk in this story to me is that the elected officials that were quoted in the article said they voted the way they did, not to join together, because that's what the people wanted. They published the results of a survey, and that may well be the case that the people don't want it. But sometimes councillors have more information than other people, and they're charged with looking long term. That sometimes is going to put them offside with popular opinion and popular vote. Now, again, I'm not saying that's the case here, but it certainly could be.
And if there's ever a time to do something in Saskatchewan, it's in the first term of office once you've just got elected. And Saskatchewan went to the polls last year. So you got 3 years to smooth things over. I'm
Indeed.
going to lose some voters here as well. But I want to but before we actually turn to our interview, I should mention that if you want to read the stories that we do mention on this shows, they are in the show notes on YouTube or in all the podcast platforms. We recommend that you do follow along and read the actual stories that we're talking about so you can stay better informed. And now our interview with Pat The Legend Vincent.
I'm looking forward to this.
In the heart of every thriving community lies a well-crafted strategic plan. But crafting such a plan requires expertise, experience, and a deep understanding of local needs. Enter Strategic Steps, your partner in municipal strategic planning. Strategic Steps' team of experts have years of experience in municipal administration At Strategic Steps, they just don't develop plans. They co create homegrown strategies tailored to your unique community. They listen, they collaborate, they empower your community to thrive. Contact Strategic Steps today and take the first step towards a brighter future for your municipality. Call Strategic Steps at 780-416-9255 or visit strategicsteps.ca to get started. Pat The Legend Vincent is a seasoned municipal administrator with over 50 years of experience in local governments across the province of Alberta. Now, his career has included several stints as Chief Administrative Officer and interim Chief Administrative Officer in various communities of all sizes, including the town of Drayton Valley, the city of Chestermere, Athabasca County, the county of Minburn number 27, Westlock County, Parkland County, and the town of Beaumont, Alberta. Now, we are going to be chatting a lot about the role of the CAO, but also the appointment of the CAO. Pat, welcome to the political trenches.
Good morning, Chris. Great to be here with you and Ian this morning.
So, first off, Pat, I just have a simple question for you. What does the role of CAO mean to you?
Being the one employee of council providing the leadership to a municipal organization and helping staff aspire to the gold standard of municipal organizational excellence.
You were the longtime CAO, well, for a few years anyway, in Parkland County. You retired from that about 11 years ago, and you've made a new career out of helping municipalities in transition. From your perspective, what's the biggest indicator of success or struggle in a municipality when you join it?
I think there's two things, Ian, that from my experience is first, setting a solid foundation. Many municipalities have gone through a struggle. There perhaps has been a revolving door of CEOs to come in and try to settle things down. And I think the second aspect is help council select the next CAO through a recruitment process that they find the best possible talent to assist them in moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Do you have, given the breadth of experience that you've got, how would you kind of define that role of particularly the interim nature of the CAO? I've heard people say that sometimes their CAOs are there to implement change, and sometimes they're there just to kind of keep the seat warm for the next person. What's your take on the interim role?
My perspective always, Ian, has been to help the municipality move forward. I've never believed in simply marking time and waiting for somebody else to come in. If there are changes that need to be made, that you make those particular changes to improve the organization and to help council achieve their particular priorities and their strategic plan for the municipality.
My supposition about the role is you're kind of waiting in the wings as maybe council is releasing an existing CAO. How do these interim positions come about? You don't see them advertised.
It has been all word of mouth. So I can happily say I've never spent any money on advertising or handing out business cards or doing any promotion whatsoever. It started off back in 2015 when the county of Thorhill, the minister fired the CAO, and I was appointed to that particular position by the minister and the department. And the reputation I got from handling that situation just simply spread through the municipal world. And so received phone calls, from time to time, if I'm available and would be interested to help other municipalities out. So it's been a succession as a result of that.
Given the time here in Alberta, we're a week and a half or so away from a municipal election. If there's a council who's thinking about transitioning from one CAO to another, Is that council wise to make that decision before the election, or should they let the new council decide after the election?
I think there's arguments on both sides. My opinion in the matter and my position would be if the relationship is not working, you know, terminate that relationship, find somebody internally to serve in an acting capacity until the new council comes in. Many councils are confident that the people that they hire will be able to bridge that particular transition in mayor and council, if there should be significant change. But given the fact that in our today's municipal political world, some councillors may be running on a platform getting rid of the previous CEO, it makes it more difficult in terms both for mayor and council as well as for the CAO.
Right. So how do you gain, as you come in as an interim, there's probably been a period of tumult leading up to that. How do you gain the trust of a council early in your tenure with them?
I have 3 rules that I share with them in the first meeting. Number 1, no surprises. I'll make sure that they don't hear something down in a coffee shop that they should have known about as an elected official. And at the same time, they don't surprise me. Rule number 2, if you make a mistake, admit it, correct it, and learn from it. I learn every single day. I'm human and I will make mistakes. So please understand that. And council may be in the same position. Rule number 3, I've got your back. I'll go to the wall for you. If it's your policy, I'll defend it and defend you. At the same time, I want you to defend me and the administration. The other thing I've often said to councils at the first meeting, if you don't, there's a real freedom. Throughout my career, I've never been shy to tell council the straight goods. But when you're in an interim position, there's even greater freedom. And I simply tell them, if you don't like the advice or what I have to say, WestJet has a flight to Phoenix tomorrow morning. I'm on it with my golf club. I used that once in the 10 different interim positions, and council never took me up on it. So it's being honest, it's being brutally upfront with them to tell them what they need to hear that somebody else maybe didn't have, the ability or the wherewithal to advise them. And you do it always in a politically correct, conscientious, sensitive way, but with a very strong message.
So obviously you're accountable to council, but you're also the head of the municipal corporation, the staff. In much the same way as you need to generate trust with council, how do you gain the trust of council who've also been through that same kind of turmoil? Sorry, trust of staff who've also been through that same kind of turmoil.
It's a matter of, I think, the words you choose, your leadership style. And I've always used the phrase, just watch me. And I know when I went to Drayton Valley, and many of my directors commented about that after about 3 or 4 months. Especially, we revamped the budget process last November. And they were all nervous and said, wow, it's going to take 4 days. Council's going to get in details. I said, no, they're not. And they didn't believe me. I said, just watch me. And we started off that particular process by playing a couple songs, Blues Brothers, Give Me Some Loving. And we put on quite a production. And then we followed up with the Manfred Mann's Blinded by the Light. But before we played that song, we gave all of council sunglasses. It put them in such a different perspective that they actually had fun. And instead of 4 days, we did it in 1.5 days. So it's being able to walk the talk and show that strong leadership that people get on board and become your partners and your supporters.
The role of the CAO is the position of CAO is the only position in government, in municipal government, that is responsible to the council. They are the only position that can be hired and fired by the entire council. And that means there are unique challenges that comes with that position, and Ian talked about them. But for this question, I want to talk about the times when the CAO is not hired, is not fired by the council, but is hired by the province. And it has happened twice in your career that we have talked about. What are the unique challenges that arise when your mandate as the CAO comes from the province and not from the council? Because the council is traditionally hires and fires them, but sometimes they get hired like you did by the province. Is there challenges?
I think it's twofold, Chris. One is you're answering to two bosses. You're answering to the official administrator as well as reporting to the province. So the accountability is two-pronged. And so it was very interesting, not particularly difficult or challenging, but it was very interesting to be put into that particular position. Whereas you're used to just reporting to one boss and being accountable, you're accountable both to the minister and the department, as well as to the official administrator who's serving as counsel and has been appointed by the minister and the department as well.
Who wins in that scenario then? Does the official administrator, who is technically acting as counsel, as the representative of the people, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot here, Pat, but you're the legend, so I'm assuming you could take this question. Who wins
Yeah.
in this scenario? Is it the official administrator or is it the province? Because your role was put there because you were put there by the province, but you're still a CAO first and foremost, and you were responsible to the municipality, not to the province, are you?
Technically that is true, but because the province has become council for the municipality de facto, then you're responding to the province as the council through their official administrator. My answer to who's the winner? The municipality, the residents, and the taxpayers of that community, because the assurance of having properly managed municipality and proper policies in place is the ultimate result and outcome. I have to share with you my very first meeting ever with an official administrator was a mind-blowing event. We had the official administrator called the meeting to order, asked for the agenda. I gave the amendments. He called the motion. All those in favor? He raised his hand and said, carried. I had to do a double take to make sure I just understood what had happened and what that experience was. It was absolutely wild, after 50 years in this business, my first time that happening, it was surreal, was what it was. And council meetings didn't last more than an hour. And I told the official administrator, you got to spice this up a bit. I think you got to debate with yourself some of these particular issues. But he never took me up on it. And it's part of the relationship between the interim CEO and the official administrator. And I was fortunate to know the official administrator very well, having worked with him for a number of years, being a colleague and a friend. And we're on the same wavelength on almost all matters. So that made it extremely easy to, proceed with the agenda in getting the municipality back on track.
We are starting this journey. This is our third episode of the journey of the role of the CAO. Now, we've spoken to CAOs who are in their very infancy of their term as CAO, 3 months or 6 months in the village of Marwayne. We have talked to people who are departing. What's your advice to the next Pat the Legend Vincent CAO in the province of Alberta or across the country who is looking at your career and saying, I hope I get to become the next legend of CAOs?
I think draw upon all of the wisdom and experience from the people around that have more years of experience than yourself. I remember when I first started off, totally novice, had never been in municipal administration, was a municipal administrator at the town of Elk Point. And there were several CEOs in the region, town of St. Paul, town of Cold Lake, town of Bonnyville, who actually reached out and offered their assistance. So I've tried to do that throughout my career with young CEOs. And if I'm permitted to drop names, I'm very proud of the new CEO at the town of Vermilion, Shannon Harrower, who was my executive assistant at the County of Vermilion River, who had aspirations. And I provide some help and some guidance, and her career is really taking off and blossoming. So if you're a young CEO starting out now, attend the conferences, do the networking. Every conference you go to, steal at least one good idea. And that'll continue to contribute to your success, continue building that strong foundation, but forever be true to your principles and to your morals. Don't be swayed. If you have to make tough decisions, make those tough decisions. People will not always be happy, but in your heart of hearts, if you can go home at night and sleep well, knowing that you made the right decision, I don't think you will ever go wrong.
We've heard this a lot over the last few episodes in this journey of the role of the CAO. The the outlook of the role of the CAO can be positive, it can be optimistic, it can be challenging. What's your stance on the future role of the CAO in municipalities across the province of Alberta and across Canada? Because it is dramatically shifting, and someone who has spent many times in many municipalities with a career of 8 to 10 years, the role of the CAO doesn't last longer than 3 years now in some cases. What's your sense of what the role will transform into over the next few years?
It's incredibly difficult now with the changes in society. We have a better educated society, more demanding. And so I think if a CEO can show what the results are, that people are getting value for their money, that's one of the prime objectives, I think. I think appreciating the fact that the master slave relationship is a master servant relationship, that not only are you serving mayor and council, you're serving the community. And if you want to be treated in a certain way, you should ensure that the residents and mayor and council are being served in that same way. We have evolved in terms of a society where we've got more of a consumer-based citizenry than we have as a democratic citizen type of society. And so the expectations and demands are much greater. You have to be perceptive, read the situation very well, and be creative in terms of providing those particular responses. But the key always has been great communications. Goes back to my number one rule, no surprises. If you're going to make some changes with regards to policy that could have far-reaching effects, make sure you go out to the community, have that dialogue with them, help them understand what the changes are being proposed. They may have some better ideas how to proceed, and ultimately it's them that's going to be impacted by those particular changes. So you try to get them on side, understanding, and perhaps your perspective will change as a result of some of that input. But communicate, communicate, communicate.
Pat, I want to thank you so much for being the legend, for being the guest, for being an amazing person, and being a great friend to both myself, and I'm assuming Ian, but I'm going to speak for him for a second. So thank you so much for doing this. This is an honor and an absolute pleasure to have you on the Political Trenches this week.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chris. And you are right. We're good friends. We have a commonality, which is the town of Slave Lake many years ago, where we both were employed. And Ian and I have known each other for a number of years, have worked closely together, and I truly call him a friend as well.
Thanks, Pat.
Our full interview with Pat the Legend Vincent will air next week. We'll be right back. Ian, another great episode under our belt about the provincial appointment of a CAO with Pat the Legend Vincent. How'd you feel like today's episode went?
I've known Pat for quite a long time, and I love having conversations with him. He's always so positive. He's authoritative and kind, and we can learn a lot from him. I think we started off talking about some stories, perhaps of things that aren't going the best that they can, and then we finished it off with Pat talking about doing good for the world, and that so it's a really nice way to end that episode.
I should mention, now during the interview, he did mention the fact that we have something in common, the town of Slave Lake, where we both worked. I should mention, because I know I'm going to get some emails, I'm not the same age as Pat. I was not there when Pat was there, even though people in Prince Rupert, Prince George, when I travel around, think I am in my 60s. I am not. I'm in my 40s. Okay. So we do have that commonality of just working in the same municipality. There's my little rant there for a second. But
And that, if I may interrupt, Chris, that's why you're not yet a legend.
Amen to that. But I do want to turn to one quick story that we are talking about, and that is we just had municipal elections in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, where we saw a stable hand at the front. We had Danny Breen reelected in St. John's. We had Craig Scott reelected in the town of Torbay. We had more municipal leaders who were just leaving and getting acclaimed. What's your thoughts on the state of municipalities in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador after this election cycle there, Ian?
Well, first of all, with the mail strike, of course, that threw a bit of a pall over the elections, and a couple of municipalities had to delay their elections a little bit. St. John's being one of them. It was a fairly typical election, I think. There are always some interesting nuances that show up, but now, of course, we've got 4 more years of hopeful stability in Newfoundland. We were talking about some of the municipal issues showing up in places like Saskatchewan, and I think Newfoundland is going to face a little bit of that coming up as well, or it ought to be facing some of that. So let's see how the new crop of locally elected leaders manage the long-term sustainability of some of these smaller municipalities in Newfoundland and Labrador.
We should also mention that we are recording this on Thursday, October 9th, and on Monday, October 20th, in the province of Alberta, we are also heading to the polls. And I will say this, and I'm going to speak on behalf of Ian and myself. Get out and vote. Get engaged. Learn about the people who are running in your campaign. I know we are a municipal show, so we have more municipally minded people who listen to the show. I get that. I understand that. But this weekend, by the time this airs, is the last weekend for this campaign. If you know family members, if you know friends who are not thinking about voting, change their minds. Democracy only works when we all get involved and we all have our voices heard. So get out on October 20th and vote. Also, quick editorial note for myself, not for Ian, but on October 20th at 7:30 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, the Cross Border Network will be going live on YouTube across Alberta, and we're going to be talking to mayors, councillors, reeves who are not running again, but also we're going to be having some election coverage from those who are winning in their respective communities. So tune in for that. Ian, I know this was a very long-winded end of the show, but we have a lot to cover in the end. Thank you so much for being in the trenches with me again today.
Thanks so much, Chris. And we didn't talk about it. I'll see you next week in Regina.